Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Palestinians, Israelis, Jews, and the left are all in need of the moral high ground. So, you can look at the struggle not in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel, and also it seems like now Hezbollah and Israel, or the Israeli military, as in part a struggle over who has the moral high ground, who is more moral, who is right. And this happens often in any political or military conflict. And it's not the only factor that is involved in success or failure of any given either political or military initiative. But it is important. And it is important not just for me, it's important, as you see, you can look at all of the transmissions, the arguments, of either the Israeli government, Israeli military, various advocates for and against, people all over the world who identify with one or the other of the combatants in this war. Or, obviously Hamas and Palestinians either in Palestine or in the diaspora, that a lot of interventions, a lot of speech, not all of it, a lot of it is about claiming some kind of moral high ground. It's not everything. And I would extend that also to the Jewish people more generally. So Israel doesn't represent the interest of the Jewish people as a whole. And they've been trying to argue to Jews and to the world that they do, but they don't. But also Jews are in need of the moral high ground, as is the left. So the left is still another category. It's not. These are not all synonymous. Okay, but they do intertwine with each other. The left, one of the most famous intellectuals, of the left was a Christian, a guy whose father was Jewish. He was converted to Christianity. But he had a Jewish background, but there are many other elements of the left that are, they're Christian, they're secular, atheist, of all kinds of different origins. So the left is a broad category there too. But all of these groups that I list in the title, they all are in need of the moral high ground for some reasons, for different reasons. But the general commonality between these groups is they are either small minorities or they are small. So that if you think of the left as being intellectually a certain portion of the intellectual in any given society, plus people of varying sizes of the population consider themselves to be left or not left, or moderate or not political at all, and so forth and so on. But the project of being left is about convincing people of that there's a better world, there's a better system to live in. And so that hinges on ethical arguments, like what is the good? And if you're arguing for the better, you have to already represent the good in some way or another. And this is something, just starting first with the left here, this is something people on the left have not been very clear on, or they haven't clearly theorized in a self-conscious way about their need for a better ethics, that they need to be ethical leaders. They need to be leaders in, they don't need to be perfect people, okay? And that gets into these kind of moral panics and identity politics and the politics of personal destruction, where you have this idea of individual perfection and so on and so on. But the general ideas, though, and the general political orientation, so about society and about human relations and so on and so on, or relations between humanity and the ecosphere, the non-human environment that we live in. Those that requires one to not have an ethical vision that needs to be, or your vision needs to be based on an ethics, I call it a macro ethics. It's not, again, so there's micro ethics, which is about your personal decisions one way or the other, so on and so on. They're not unrelated, but there are people who want to shunt all ethics into that microethical box. So the left is in need of a sensitivity and a high ethical standard. They need to be leading people, and with a vision of a better society, and they need to also observe in detail how the current society is falling short of either its own ethical standards or some higher ethical standards. So there are two different modus, or two different forms of discourse, of rhetoric, and rhetoric is not simple. Language is very, very important because it helps direct our future actions and creates agreements between people about how to agree on something and then move together as a group, or governments to write laws, which are all in language, so forth and so on, that then become realities. So, not like magically, and not, in some kind of wizard-like way where you just say something in some or magical way, but that the written words, or the spoken word, then becomes the written word, so forth and so on, in laws, and then is enacted in ways that shape societies and shape our social environment. So anyway, but all of that has to come, the people who win politically have to convince people that they have an ethical vision that is more in tune with the population, that is more their cup of tea. And because the left has a particular mission of progress and moving forward, there are more challenges there than the typical just sort of getting past the post to win an election and to get into office, so forth and so on. There's a program of change. So, but anyway, leaving the left temporarily aside, though, the Jews have been, are people who have been persecuted for a couple of millennia, and they first by the Romans, enslaved by the Romans, so forth and so on, but then they're the Israel where they did live, or our people did live, was sacked, and then basically there was this big diaspora where people, moved. Jews moved all around Europe and North Africa and so forth and so on, in the Middle East, but then certainly in Europe, the Jews were shunted into a role that was demonized in Catholicism and then other forms of Christianity after the Reformation, into a role where they were persecuted. They were thought to be, there was the blood libel. They thought, there was a bunch of different myths that were projected onto the Jews, and there was this and so Jews were subject to basically witch hunts or persecution on a regular basis, and so but eventually, through the Enlightenment, Jews were emancipated. There was this recognition by some of the leading intellectuals, the Christian leading intellectuals of the secular Enlightenment, or the secularizing Enlightenment, that Jews were human beings like Christians, and so on and so on, and there was an opening for Jews to become accepted in the societies they lived in, and to be not just live in ghettos and live sort of in a mini state within a state, or a tribe within a larger tribe, and that they were they became also very interested because of the opening. Intellectual life was something, and people, Jewish tradition is a lot about studying books, so forth and so on. So, and there's a respect for learning, and so many became professionals, intellectuals, so forth and so on, and also they always, though, needed in a way the assent of the people they lived in, that they were not the quasi-demonic figures of the Christian mythology, and that they were, and so they needed the population to accept the ethical ideals of the Enlightenment, the emancipation of Jews and the Enlightenment, and to basically an idea of universal humanity, and so which is a ethical principle. So there's universality, that all humans are very similar, and so your commonalities outweigh your differences, and so but Jews are very dependent, because they, in every nation except Israel, and now in Israel they're not, if you look at Palestine and Israel, they are also, there are, let's say, a plurality, but in Israel itself they are a big majority, but still in almost all countries of the world they're a small minority. So being a small minority, they are dependent on and vulnerable to the ethical currents in the society, what the general population, the non-Jewish population, embraces as their standard for what is good. And if they turn to a biopolitics, a tribal politics, like Nazism and fascism, or some other variant, a fundamentalism of various kind, religious fundamentalism, it's not, religious fundamentalism is not exactly biopolitics, but a sense of that this universality is no longer the high the standard of the society, but instead that you favor your own, you favor people who look like you, who talk like you, or who supposedly are genetically closer to you by appearance or whatever. So anyway, so Jewish, the welfare of Jews is dependent on high ethical standards being something that is, or that the laws of a country and the actions of governments and the actions of people in that society who are not Jewish are guided by some high ethical standards. So otherwise, as a small minority that potentially is, persecuted and blamed and for troubles and so forth and so on, and be scapegoated, that they they will experience pogroms and potentially eliminationist politics and military police action, so forth and so on, has happened in the Holocaust. So so anyway, that dependence of Jews on that kind of ethical standards and so forth and so on is annoying to some Jews, and is annoying to. So we're getting now to Israelis. So Israelis are also they're a nation that is needs to make and justify its project, which is one of taking away land from the people who lived there in the early 20th century, the mostly Arab population there, mostly Muslim Arab population, the Palestinians, and for the purpose of sheltering the Jews, and in particular after the Holocaust. So as a way to escape Europe prosecution in Europe, and mostly Christian Europe, and so that that project needed justification. So many of the justifications are ethical arguments, or there's also the political power play and the use of a connection to Europe, and the sense of being an outpost of Europe, at the same time also basically being a way for European governments after the Holocaust to solve the Jewish question, or at least not solve it, but to give them a way to all the displaced persons after once the Nazis had collected many Jews into camps, and they become displaced persons. Many emigrated to the Levant and then to Israel. So anyway, this requires there is a wrong being done to the people of the Levant, the mostly Muslim Arabic population. So and that has been the ongoing argument, the ethical argument that is not ethical, not in the sense of judging it as good. I'm just saying that people are trying to argue against other people's argument about what is the good, who is most justified, who has the most right to this land, among other things, and or largely the land, but then also society overall, and who has the right to exist there. Who is the better people? Okay, so there's a competition between, so better in the sense of like who has this. So Israelis are often needing to use those justifications, and now this is sometimes now with the evolution of Israel as a mini superpower in that region, though recent events have exposed the weaknesses in that, and in their defenses and in their intelligence, so forth and so on, that they've been so prided themselves and been so celebrated in the world, but they still possess lots of allies in the United States and in Europe, and mostly who have lots of arms, and they have gotten lots of aid from mostly the United States, but also other countries. So they can, let's say, ignore their arguments are not rigorously ethical in the sense that their self-consciousness is flawed when they make these arguments. Not everybody, not every Israeli, but the Israeli governments, they have been overlooking the crimes they commit, and they've been constantly in violation of international law, and they have and some of it is so this is where there's also ethical claims based on a sense of victimhood. So being a victim and claiming victimhood in legal settings, but also and proving quote unquote victimhood in legal settings, but also just claiming that one is the greater victim has a high ethical value, even though on the other side, so this is where you see the people with the guns and with the power bullying other people. So it's not a consistent, it's a claim of victimhood. It's this paradox. So it's the claim of victimhood while victimizing others in reality, but just not talking about it or not linking the two things. And so there's been a very bad, ethically wrong overlooking by the apologists for Israel abroad, and also in Israel itself, or for Israeli policy, to just overlook a lot of the crimes, or almost all the crimes that had been committed by Israel against mostly Palestinians, so it's not as though they're, in a real sense, their ethical claims are very much undermined. And this is also, for me, someone who lives in the diaspora and is not interested in living in Israel and the Levant. At the same time, having Israel, quote unquote, the people who mistake me, as like that my country, like Donald Trump just said, your country is Israel. At one, he let this slip. He's a racist. He's a dumb guy in many ways. But his slip up or not slip up of saying, that you're in one speech that your country is, Israel, so on and so on, to a bunch of American Jews. So this, the actions of Israel are important to me, or the lack of their ethical, the project of, you could say, right-wing Zionism, you could say Zionism overall, but certainly basically, it's been successively shorn of its pretensions to socialism, so forth and so on, and we have just a series of, we now have a fascist government although there's a big coalition with this war, but still there's loads of fascistic elements to the current regime in Israel. So, but their victimization of the Palestinians, the robbery of land from the Palestinians, is to me very troubling, because I think for my safety and my a sense of being accepted by the society I live in, I need to have a sense of Jews being at least of moderately ethical people, not people who are repeating the crimes that were done to them to another people. Okay, so not having learned from the Holocaust, that they are, I mean, it's right now, there is a chance that they could do that. They're being urged not to do stuff I don't want to be vague, to do genocide on the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip by, quietly, supposedly, by Joe Biden. But it's not out they're not being pressured publicly and in the international stage by their allies, saying, like, look, our support is dependent on you acting. Now, there's more and more talk about acting according to international law, and I will believe it when I see it. Okay, Israel's military is already not acting according to military law in its bombing of Gaza and its collective punishment of the people who live in Gaza by bombing them. So, and ideas occurred to me. I'm not a military strategist. I can put it out there, but I have an alternative idea of what they should have done, even from the point of view of their own military strategy. And again, there were so many reasons why they wouldn't have done what I think they ought to have done. But putting that aside, so they are while they have the policies of the Israeli government, the victimization of the Palestinians by the Israeli regime, successive Israeli governments, and their constant robbery of land from the Palestinians by the Israeli regime, has, for me, created, as someone who believes in universal human equality and that the Palestinians have as much or maybe more right, but certainly now there are generations of Israelis or Jews who've lived there in the Levant, so I think they have some rights too to cohabitation there. But anyway, but not domination as they do now, and jackbooted domination of the Palestinians. So anyway, so getting finally to the Palestinians. So the Palestinians are also, even more so, really, right now in this point in time, in need of the moral high ground, in my opinion, and that's imagining that the Palestinians will reject the horror show that Hamas put on. They are being, and a horror show of a different type is being enacted on them. So I'm not saying one horror show, the horror show that Hamas, supposedly representing their interest, enacted on Israelis, is more important than the one that's happening now and to Gazans, and also not just now, but it's been happening over many years, or not just Gazan, but just to Palestinians more generally. So also in the West Bank too. But they are also in need of claiming the moral high ground, and also in a way, maddeningly for them, that is actually matching the reality. In other words, the Israelis, unfortunately, because of their military power and their friends and the PR that is done for them, for the Israeli government, in some circles, in the circles that are wealthier and have, the circles in terms of in the world, in the international community, they are given a buffer by mostly European countries and the United States, that so it is maddening for the Palestinians to see the false morality of the Israelis vis-a-vis them. But unfortunately for them, they do not have the same backup of all these false, or mostly false, let's say, shills for their cause. They have their own. They have people from other parts of the world who are from the Arab world, from the formerly colonized world, who identify with Palestinians and who and with their struggle and so forth and so on. So they do have that backing, and that, but they have to, in this struggle in this area where they are, not in the great surround of that also matters too in the great world stage, but they have to basically, in my opinion, and not just in my opinion, they have to assert that those doing atrocities in their name is not acceptable, that they will disown the Hamas, maybe the entire Hamas organization, maybe 90% of it. I know there are different arms of it. They do different things, but the maybe 100% of it. And they need to. It has to be. It has to come from them. It has to be from the heart in a way that is hard, and it's easy for me to say, hard for the people to do. Maybe there's also the threat to them of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, brutally. If there is a contingent of Palestinians who speak loudly about Hamas's turpitude, its degradation of the cause of Palestinian liberation, its degradation of humanity more generally, and its vision for the society, its fundamentalism, its really so forth. So if there's not there, it may be dangerous for Rashida Tlaib or others. This guy Mohammed El Kurd, who I follow on Twitter, a writer in a young man in the West Bank. So, I think it's they need to maddeningly, and it's not. I wish they had the same freedom to do catharsis, in the sense of to shout and yell about how, look at our fighters, and look how they're marching through these gates, and look these spoiled Israelis, they're getting what they deserve by being killed, by being chased, by having their fun disturbed, and that's, I can see how that can be satisfying for Palestinians and for people, not just but also their supporters, people in. It's been for me as a Jew, it's been very, very realizing that we are a small minority in the world, and we're a small minority in most countries we live in, and I'm okay with that, but also one that has a history of persecution and in many societies, and sort of in a kind of a mystical, demonic, sort of things being projected onto us by other people. That to see the way Israel has acted. Now I'm switching back to Israel, but that it's been maddening to me to see that they act in such a way that really casts us Jews in very, very bad light, and makes us makes us more a target of anti-Semitism, stokes anti-Semitism, and I'm terribly, terribly worried about it, and I think it's not as though, Jews shouldn't defend themselves, they shouldn't stand up for themselves, but the way Israel has done it is to basically to stomp on a less fortunate people, with the help of big friends, okay? And the rest of the world being mostly from much poorer countries and looking on, saying, we identify with those Palestinians. Those Jews are the spoiled brats of the world. And we don't have any sympathy for them. And that is also, in a way, I'm putting it in sort of different terms, but it's I think people are and there are also Jews that try to make this, special child kind of thing. They put it, they try to make it into this great, that they're entitled to everything, that we, or the Israelis, are entitled to everything because we're so special and wonderful. We're the innovators, and we're the most innovative nation, so forth and so on. Yes, with this huge subsidy from European countries and the United States and so forth and so on. But anyway, they act, and there are other people who do that in the diaspora too, but who act with total lack of awareness of privilege and of economic inequality, and even though in the United States, Jews are no longer the ethnicity with the highest median income. Asian Americans are. So it's not as though, we're necessarily sitting pretty or sitting the prettiest. But anyway, there are people who attempt to, in a sort of, ethnic pride kind of way. But ethnic pride is too neutral a way to talk about it. But really saying that we're entitled to everything that we have, and it's all our doing, and we're all due to our great merit. And it's like, well, other groups of people have merit too. It's not, and they have different merits, and and they're also, this is also not shared universally throughout the Jewish peoples of the world, and this wonderful achievements, so forth and so on. So that they talk about in that happens in Israel or somewhere else. But anyway, just sort of smugness, I guess I'm saying, that undermines your moral position, I think. And so, and maybe I have a particular problem with smugness, but I think it is extremely, if you are making the case that, for instance, you are entitled to live in somewhere in the world other than Europe, and it just happens to be in the Middle East, you have to make your case extremely clearly and based on humanitarian reasons, and you also have to not deprive others of their livelihoods in doing so, and their and to now that, I mean, some of the damage has been done, but to try to there needs to be some kind of deal made, and that's also maddening, I think. For there are people who are eliminationist about the other group. So it's anyway, just to wrap up, this fight over this small patch of land, relatively small, in the Middle East, with fairly large number of people in a small area of land, that there needs to be a clarity. People need to make their arguments based on reality, there needs to be a context of a universal humanity, which is an ethical standard, again, from the Enlightenment, among other places, and that sense of that needs to be something that everybody speaks up for and tries to sustain. Right now, both sides are not sustaining it, both the Israelis and the Palestinians, in different ways. Either the Israelis are able to talk a better game in that way, but their actions undermine it, and the Palestinians, they point out flaws often in the Israeli argument, but they don't, in my opinion, provide a clear enough alternative in their own community for some of the worst actors who are, terrorists. So, or rely on terror. And anyway, so this need for the moral high ground is something that I'll go into more detail about it, more specifically about the left and so forth and so on, because the left has had a history of just, disregarding it, and I could go into more detail about why that is in another video. Anyway, so let me stop here. I'm sorry to go on so long. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Please subscribe to Politics 2100 if you want to get notice of future videos, and maybe we can have a discussion in the comments about the contents in this video or what I missed. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.